This episode of The Biggest Table is brought to you in part by Wild Goose Coffee. Since 2008, Wild Goose has sought to build better communities through coffee. And for our listeners, Wild Goose is offering a special promotion of 20% off a one-time order using the code TABLE at checkout. To learn more and to order coffee, please visit wildgoosecoffee.com. In this episode of The Biggest Table, I delve into the subject of church camp with guest Cara Meredith, a speaker, writer, and public theologian. The discussion revolves around Cara's new book, Church Camp, Bad Skits, Cry Night, and How White Evangelicalism Betrayed a Generation, examining the complex nature of church camps. Cara emphasizes the importance of holding both the positive and negative aspects of camp life, discussing the formative experiences alongside the theological and social harms encountered. The conversation provides insight into maintaining nuanced views, fostering dialogue with children about their experiences, and imagining better ways to cultivate genuine spiritual growth and inclusivity in camp environments. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Biggest Table. I am your host, Andrew Camp, and in this podcast, we explore the table, food, eating, and hospitality as an arena for experiencing God's love and our love for one another. And today, I'm joined by Cara Meredith. A sought-after speaker, writer, and public theologian, Cara is the author of Church Camp, Bad Skits, Cry Night, and How White Evangelicalism Betrayed a Generation, and The Color of Life, A Journey Toward Love and Racial Justice. She has been featured in national media outlets such as The Oregonian, The New York Times, The Living Church, The Christian Century, and Baptist News Global. Passionate about justice, spirituality, and storytelling alike, Cara holds a Master of Theology from Fuller Seminary and is a postulant for holy orders in the Episcopal Church. With a background in education and nonprofit work, Cara also works part-time as the Director of Development for Made for PAX Co., an organization dedicated to providing mentorship and vocational resources to emerging creatives, contemplatives, church leaders, and community builders of color. When she's not working, you'll likely find her reading a book, tinkering around in the garden, or hanging out with her family. She's proud to call Oakland, California home. So thanks for joining me today, Cara. It's great to meet you and looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks, Andrew. Excited to be here.
So we'll just jump in with this question because as I was telling you before we started recording, as I was reading the book, my wife sees the book, sees the subtitle, and she's like, why are you ruining camp for everybody? So like, why a book about church camp? And I don't think you're ruining church camp for us. You're actually holding a nuanced view, but like, why a book about church camp?
Yeah. Well, yes, indeed. I hope that I am not ruining church camp for everyone. As I say in the book, I love camp, and because I love camp, I criticize camp. So in that way, the why is that really this book birthed out of paradox, out of the both and, out of that tension of loving this place and also recognizing that I didn't know if I could send my own kids to those camps that I had been very involved in. Also recognizing the harm that had happened theologically and then to specific people groups. So as far as why, I hope it serves as an invitation to, yes, hold nuanced points of view, but also to ask questions and to perhaps even create new ways of living within, not only within white evangelicalism as a whole, but within these different arenas that are so formative to children, but really to all of us.
Right.
Yeah.
No, because, and you do hold this delicate balance and tension of like seeing the good in camp, but also where we failed. Because for, any of us who grew up white evangelical, church camp was like, it's the place, right? Like it's what we look forward to every summer. We're recording May 19th. Camp season's about to get started for a lot, and so like how did camp form you? Like what is the good that you want to hold on to about camp?
Yeah. Well, I oftentimes say and I say this in truth, but I went to camp for the first time in 1988 as a 9-year-old. So I'll let you and the listeners do the math. And then I just stayed for almost another 25, 30 years. Really, I stayed for another 25 years and then had one last blip that was at the 30-year mark. But in that way, camp was one of the most formative places for me. It was formative as a camper, as a young teenager growing up in the 90s. I mean, I remember I had my first kiss at camp. Like, I mean, that's pretty formative.
Right.
But camp was a place that I could go and I could be my silliest, most authentic, campiest self. In college, I started working at a camp the summer after my freshman year of college, and I stayed there for 4 years. I worked there all 4 summers in college. And then actually the first summer after I was a high school English teacher too. So camp, not only as a camper, but then as a young adult, really became formative to me and very formative to my identity. And in a number of different ways, it was an environment that I thrived in. And because I was what camp was looking for and camp was what I was looking for, I just continued to stay. So for me, that meant staying as a camp speaker in I mean, honestly, more progressive evangelical environments that would allow me as a woman to speak. But I just kept going back to
Mm.
camp because I knew I could be who I most was deeply inside in that environment.
No, right. Because, if you've been to camp, like I remember camp, it's and you even say this in your book that it's easy to follow Jesus at camp. Like there is something magical about
Yeah.
camp. Like it can be a seminal moment for somebody's faith.
Mhm.
And so like what why does camp then keep drawing us back? Like what is it about like this that we still yearn for? Because like even today I'm like I would love to go back to camp. Like, like we've thought about, do I take my family to church camp? Like,
Mhm.
like what is it about camp that then lures us? Like, and you mentioned like it helped you be free, but like there's something I think
Yeah.
too that allows us to experience Jesus in different ways than we do
Yeah.
normally.
Yeah. I mean, for me, and I would say for a lot of people, I think the biggest thing is that camp, camp is intention to be a place where creation and creator kiss.
Hmm.
So I recognize that, I mean, this is a podcast that finds a home under the Christian umbrella, so I can say those words.
Right.
But indeed, camp is a place, camp enthusiast, historian, he has a PhD in it, in the arena, but Jacob Sorensen, he calls them sacred playgrounds. And I
Hmm.
love that
Hmm.
because it is a place where God is present and where we humans can go and play. So
Hmm.
I know that, for instance, I love to go camping with my boys, which doesn't necessarily mean we're going to church camp.
Right.
But I know that as soon as we show up at the campsite and we build a fire and we pitch a tent and we roll out our sleeping bags and we bust out the marshmallows or whatever it is we're having for dinner or dessert, that there is going to be something magical that happens there. So I think and again, that's not even within the walls of a church camp, but I think for a lot of folks, there is first that gift from God to us, that comes with being in nature,
Hmm.
being in such a sacred space. I think also, though, there attached to camp is nostalgia, is memory. That's also, on the other hand, why so many folks are also, some folks are having a really hard time with my book.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because, and maybe this is like your wife who's going, don't ruin it for me, but they don't want their memories of this place to be tarnished, even if there were harmful elements. But the memories that we make in this heightened physical, emotional, spiritual environment where everything tends to be really big and campy, for lack
Yeah.
of a better word, those are the memories that stay with us. So then
Hmm.
you get folks who 30 years later, they talk about their camp high, that spiritual high that they experienced in this place, and they want to recreate it. And yet, again, it was so easy to love God there and to sense the love of God in that place. And that can be also the tension where it's so much harder when you get back to the real world. So, so yeah, I know I've deviated a little bit from the original question, but I think that's where I go.
No, and it is. I love that, sacred playground, the creative aspect. Because I think for many of us, it was a place where we were away from home for a week, like no parents for a week, and so like rules were different, and what you could and couldn't do was different, within the tight confines of evangelicalism, obviously, like,
Yeah.
yeah, no two-piece swimsuits, obviously.
No making purple.
No.
No. Yep. I mean,
Yeah.
which I go into in the book. Like,
Right.
I mean, in truth, these are all elements of purity culture, which
Yeah.
are really not helpful toward women in particular.
No.
But there is so much freedom that happens in these environments, in which, yes, kids are able to be kids and to thrive apart from at least their parental authority figures.
Right. But yet, then I think, like with a lot of evangelicalism, there's a reckoning we're all having to come to grips with, and what
Yeah.
the pitfalls are the less than robust theology. And so, like, how did that process work out for you of being raised in camp, nurtured by camp, and then all of a sudden recognizing the gaps?
Yeah.
Like, what was that process like for you?
Yeah, the reality is that I equate this, and I say this at the very end of the book, but I equate it to a very slow moving beehive,
Mm.
in which there was a spiritual evolution that took place. So, if I were a beekeeper, which I am not, I do like to garden. I dream of bees, but I also recognize my limits. But if I were a beekeeper and I wanted to move my hive from one side of the yard to the other, the reality is that I would need to move that hive over a number of different days and weeks and very slowly just move it 1 foot at a time. Otherwise, the all the little worker bees are going to run from the queen bee or fly away from
Mhm.
the queen bee, and they're not going to stay. So for me, the reality is that this book, the last time I spoke at a youth camp was in 2014. The last time I spoke at a family camp was in 2018. So hence that 25, 30-year time period of being at camp. Um, in the midst of that, I finished up my master's degree in 2013. So I think, in a sense, part of it I can blame on seminary, where, unbeknownst to Fuller Seminary, there were certainly different perspectives that really began to just conflict with what I
Mm.
felt inside. I was also in full-time ministry for nearly a decade with an organization called Young Life, and that's where a lot of my camping experience, or my camp speaking experience, happened as well. But I realized there was also a tension that existed within Young Life's model of theology, that they were proclaiming needed to happen in a certain progression, and with a value toward certain theological theories that I was not in alignment with. So I think it was a combination of those. And then I would say the last was just different people coming into my life,
Mm.
that I recognize now when I look back on that setting, really camp was doing harm to. And for me, those three people groups were women. And I say that as a woman, as someone who identifies as a woman, people of color, and the LGBTQ community. And I began to recognize the harm that was happening toward those groups in particular.
Right. And that's where I really want to dive in, just because I think it is the important conversation. Because you have this quote. I want to find it real quick, just because it's such a great quote, and I want to.
Yeah, what did I say, Andrew?
You said some great things. What's it? Sorry, it was by Ross Murray. He mentions evangelical camps want you to change for them more than they want to change for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, like, I think that's where this is where the harm comes in. While camps foster a sense of belonging, if you're a white straight male, and even I think for white straight females too, I think it can work to some degree. But like for others, those on the fringes, it 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 isn't a place of belonging always. And so, like,
Yeah,
help us unpack. Like, first unpack that quote, like, because I
yeah.
think that's where we need to start. And then like help us understand the harm that camp has done.
Yeah. Yeah, so the section that Ross, and he did ask me to refer to him as Deacon Ross. So Deacon Ross Murray, he's a deacon in the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Ross is also a gay man. Ross is also a camp enthusiast. He loves these places, and he too was so formed by this place called camp. Since then, and from and with and through all of those different intersectionalities and identities, Ross now runs a 1 week camp during the summer called the Naming Project, which is specifically for which started, with a grant to create inclusive camping options for BIPOC, the LGBTQ plus community, and those who are disabled, and really now is serving as a place for the LGBTQ community, in particular for kids. So they are able to go and they are able to be their most authentic and free selves. And all of which is then celebrated under the umbrella of God's love. It still very much is a Christian camp and is still very much celebrates God. So in this, when I came across Ross in a kind of in a roundabout way, but I discovered this camp and knew that it wouldn't. Most ELCA camps would probably, some might still be following the tenets of white evangelicalism, but the ELCA as a whole is not going to be a part of the evangelical side of the church, minus the evangelical part of their identity as Lutherans. But for most listeners, they might know this. But that being said, when Ross said that evangelical camps want you to change for them more than they want to change for you, that was so true, especially for those whom Ross was most speaking about, which is queer identifying kids. So just last night, for instance, I had a private event in Auburn, California, which is a small town northeast of Sacramento, getting into the hill country. It's just gorgeous. And a lot of those people used to be very involved in different facets of white evangelical camping. And I would say for probably half the room, it was a small group, there were 20 of us there. But for half the people gathered there, because we ended up doing more of a conversation with all of us than me sitting up front reading my book. But for more than half of the folks there, they had left because they had realized that the camps they were dedicating their lives to, and or the organizations, the ministries, were not safe spaces for the LGBTQ plus children, kids, teenagers, campers, humans, whatever we want to call it, that they were working with, that there were certain expectations. So for instance, if they had a transgender identifying child, that child would go to camp, but because camps operate as private entities, camps are allowed to discriminate. And so that transgender child might have to be in the same cabin as kids of their assigned birth. And there are 1,000 different ways that this happens. But what does it mean for us? I think this is part of the challenge. And every chapter, as you saw, every chapter could very loosely be broken up into 3 ways in which it starts with what I said at the beginning, because really it follows this 7 talk progression that I gave in a number of different denominational, non-denominational parachurch organizations and environments. But this 7 talk progression, and within it, so it's each talk or each chapter then is breaking down what I originally said, what was wrong with what I said, and what we can do better. And really just seeking to dream of better ways forward. So when I think of Deacon Ross and the words that he spoke and the love that he has, not only for grace, but of the God who is grace, who loves him, who calls him beloved, who calls all of those campers at the Naming Project beloved, it makes me wonder, what can we do so that we are the ones changing for them and for their needs, which is exactly in alignment with who God is. There you go. I'm preaching, but you're picking up what I'm putting down.
I'm picking up what you're putting down. No, and that's like Jesus becomes us. Like he doesn't ask us to. to become him, like he becomes us and
Yeah.
walks among, like Emmanuel, God with us.
Yeah.
And so like, what does camp and even the gospel look like if we are to
Hmm.
become, God with them?
Yeah.
Uh, that's a different question than like, how do we get the most tick marks, so our donors are happy, which, you touch on that, like, hey, like a lot of these camps are run private funded through generous donors
Yeah.
um, who love Jesus, like, but they want to see, is their money being put to good use? And the
They
only
want
way
results.
they want results. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, and so that puts camp maybe in a weird model.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, the reality is that the reality of is that this happens in a number of different ministerial situations
right.
or environments. So it's, this is not exclusive to white evangelicalism by any means.
No.
I mean, in every church environment, numbers are a thing because we have to be able to send numbers in, when it comes to church growth or whatever else it might be
Right.
yeah. I think especially in this environment though, because numbers are connected to donor dollars, it just becomes a little stickier and trickier. So I do write quite a bit about this, chapter 6, which is supposed to be a chapter on the resurrection. And again, it follows this particular progression of the good news, which is a
Mm.
progression of conversion, of
Yeah.
trying to get kids from point A to point B, from either not believing in Jesus to believe in, or from being lukewarm to asking Jesus into their hearts for the 39th time again. Um, but within this, we tell the good news of resurrection, that, oh yeah, like Jesus didn't stay dead on the cross. By the way, he rose again. But from that, um, there's this convoluted path that starts to happen where consumerism, transactionalism, capitalism, I mean, in all these different ways, begins to take over.
Right.
So there were a number of different folks that I interviewed, and one of the guys that I interviewed, he had worked at camp both in seasonal and year-round camping environments. And he remembered just feeling a little ick in his stomach when that letter came at the end of the summer, in which at one of the camps that he had supported financially, and it just said, and they said, hey, thank you so much for giving. Because of you, because of your dollars, 103 kids came to know Jesus this summer. And he sat there going, wait a minute, was that the point? That like we would convert, and like that my dollars would be going to this, and that you would then be counting like how many kids cross this line? Like maybe that's not the point. So yeah, so it shows up in so many different ways.
Right.
And obviously we could talk about this for another 5 hours.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
you talk, like at what point does something become manipulative?
Yeah.
And, teenagers, their hormones, emotions are run amok, and you put them in this
Hmm.
sort of, I don't even know what to call it, this space, this creative space. And like, you're not
Incubator. Yeah.
incubator. That's a great, yes. That's, I think, the word I
Uh-huh.
was looking for, and I couldn't find that
Yeah.
word. But if you put them in this incubator, like at what point are we preying on kids' emotions
Hmm.
versus actually helping them fall in love with a triune
Yeah.
God?
Yeah. I mean, welcome to maybe why your wife shouldn't read the book.
Right.
But also
Right.
we're holding the both and. So it's one of those that, again, if the point is conversion, then there is going to be a certain formula that is going to be followed. And within many of these environments, whether, and I imagine we're going to get to this, but whether the night of decision happens on the first night of camp, like it does in some places, or the fifth night of camp, or the last night of camp, because it happens at all different places along the way.
Right.
If we are trying to get kids there, then there are also certain things that are going to happen to enhance getting people there. So that's where the program team they might do the program team. They're often the people who are in front, and they're being funny, and they're telling jokes, and they're making people laugh. But they might be doing that solely to try and break down walls, which is great. But also, like, why can't we just make people laugh for the sake of humor and laughter?
Yeah.
So there's that piece. But there's also like there can be a tendency to run kids ragged, to make them super tired. One interviewee said, "Well, what were we supposed to do? We were so hyped up on sugar. We were barely getting any sleep. All of a sudden you get to decision night, everybody else is crying around you." It's so then you have, I mean, like, is it natural to think that, yeah, emotional manipulation, groupthink might really be a part of this? But she was like, how else were you supposed to respond when Jennifer Knapp, started playing in the background? Of course you were going to cry. Of course you were going to make a decision. And for her, she was a Presbyterian. So that meant it was called confession night. So
Right.
they were supposed to throw their pine cones into the fire. So she's like, Jane app's playing. I'm holding a pocket full of pine cones. I'm confessing my sins over and over. Tears are running down my face. Like, it was a desired result. But also, like where, at what point, I guess my last thing, at what point do we go too far? Like,
Right.
one thing I oftentimes say, we were talking about our kids before we got on this call. My kids are a little bit older than yours, but my sixth grader is coming into his humor right now, and which I love.
Yeah.
He's super funny most of the time. But also, there is a point in which I just say, you just cross the line. You just cross the line. A little too far. Cross the line. And I think that's where, in these environments, it's really easy to cross the line. A little too far.
Right.
Like, why are we doing that? Are we doing that just for donor numbers? Just so we can say, oh, we had the most kids accept Jesus into their hearts this week. We had the biggest response. We really did a good job.
Right.
Like, cross the line.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the effectiveness of camp, like, I no longer work in churches, but like, remember hearing like, we had this many kids accept Jesus, this many kids get baptized, and this many kids are going to commit themselves to ministry. Like those and obviously if you're giving a 2-minute camp report, like how do you distill? But it comes back to like, what's the point of sending our kids to camp? Like, why do we send them to camp? Like if it's only, if the goal is only to get them converted, like, well, chances are, if I was raised in the church, I've prayed that prayer since I was 5, like, and have rededicated my life too many times to count. Like, so like, it really asks us, like, you're asking us to like reckon with the question of like, what's the point of church camp? And do you have an answer? Like, do you like, is there a point? Like, like what do we hold on to in the midst of a, a desired set that you're working your way through, like a progression that like any good therapist probably would do, people want to work towards healing, but there's also then manipulation.
Yeah. I mean, what's the point of church camp? I think if we were to go back to the beginning, of camping, we would see that camp was a place for white males to get out of city urban environments into the woods. So maybe not that far back, but if we look to the origins of Christian camping in the early 20th century, it really was designed as a place for, again, God and humans to meet.
Right.
So for me, when I am asked this question or questions like it, I do still think that I still believe that camps are beautiful, sacred, holy places. I also don't think that we need to do a whole lot for God to make God's self known. Like, if God is in a place, which I believe, as I am a staunch Episcopalian now. I have hopped from one side of the Christian tradition pond to the other. My poor Baptist father is just like, where did I go wrong? But for me, theologically, I believe that God is present everywhere.
Right.
And if I believe that God is already in a place, present in a place, then there's just not a whole lot that I need to do to prove that right. So I think I would start by simply saying, well, let's get rid of the need to convert, and or for that to be the whole goal. What would happen if we just simply had a place where kids and God and nature met, where this holy kissing happened between the three, and then we just kept saying, hey, God loves you. Hey, you are God's beloved. Hey, you are loved for exactly who you are as you are. And maybe that means preaching a gospel of belonging over belief, that belonging comes before belief, that all of a sudden kids realize, oh, well, I'm in. Well, yeah, God loves me. NBD, no big deal. Sweet. Let's go on the zip line. You know, but then you don't need all these other elements that so often hijack it, in which people come to faith over with fear. You know, because why'd they say yes? Well, they thought they killed Jesus. Well, they're scared to go to hell. Like, well, they feel really bad. Yeah, that God is mad and angry at them. And so, I mean, there's one theologian that you may have read about, but theologian Jeff McSwain, and he talks about that quite a bit. He just says, if people come to faith out of fear, then they do not stay. That is where deconversion largely finds a home, because they nothing is keeping them there, especially if shame is a part of that and guilt. Like, of course, 10,000 people a day here in our country would be, or are then leaving the faiths and religions of their childhoods.
No, and if we imagine camp being a place where we just preach God loves you, like we don't have kids, again, like I hear stories, you know, from a youth pastor friend, like, you know, talking to his students and like, oh, I didn't have an emotional experience. Like I didn't cry. So like, there's something wrong with me. Like, what's wrong with me? And you're like, if your camp experience is based on emotions, like that's no better than fear. And, you know, like, and emotions are great. Like we should experience deep emotions, but like if camp is measured by your emotional response, then like, are we doing something wrong? Yeah.
And I would argue, unfortunately, in a lot of these environments, because, so I don't know if you want to go to Cry Night yet.
Yeah, let's go. Let's go to Cry Night.
Let's go. Let's talk about Cry Night.
Cry Night.
So I alluded to it earlier, but they're almost always in these environments, because the point is conversion. There comes a night that kids are encouraged to get right with God, which is also a night of heightened emotions, because crying oftentimes comes with that. So for all the people that I interviewed, there were different names for this night. And as you noted with one of your friends before we started the episode, indeed, Cry Night is a real thing. I called it Cry Night, never to the children, only as a staff person and kind of in jest, but also what was I doing? But it was also called Serious Night, or Decision Night, or again, the Presbyterians, Confession Night, or the Crosstalk. Whatever it was, there were a number of different names for this night. And from it, though, because the theory most often employed in this night was a theory or an adherence toward penal substitution, that meant that kids walked away feeling like crap about themselves because of the human depravity present within this theory, and then feeling like they had killed Jesus. So I mean, and I do go into this, and there's one page I'm trying to find right now, but these were just some of the quotes that people said of what they perceived the message to be by and when and as this theory was used to tell the story of God on the cross as an atonement theory. What did that mean? Jesus saved you from an angry God. You were saved from going to hell. Someone else said, you're dirty, but don't worry. God loves you so much that he killed his only son. Another person, Jesus loves me, but his dad thinks I'm a piece of, and I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss on your podcast. And the last one, I'm a wretched sinner and I don't exist, and I cannot exist without God. So those were the messages perceived. That may not have been the intention of the speaker. That was not my intention as a speaker. But we're talking about 10, 13, 15, 18-year-old kids in these environments. It doesn't matter what the intention is. It is the reception, it is that which is received. So the reality is that this theory is used because it works.
Right.
There were so many people that I talked to, so many pastors, former camp staffers that were like, oh yeah, I hate penal substitutionary atonement theory. Like, go read the late Rachel Held Evans. She had big thoughts about it, of which the Theo Bros like went into full-on attack mode toward her. I haven't been attacked by the Theo Bros yet, but
Oh,
I
wow.
won't say that I'm above it. I'm sure it's coming.
Yeah.
Come on,
Come
Theo
on.
Bros.
Yeah, exactly.
But the reality is that camps in particular who were limited by a certain amount of days or time, whether it was a 3-day, a 5-day, a 7-day, or a 2-week camp, they were limited. And so if they wanted results, this was what they had to use in order to get results, in order to get those numbers at the end of the week of the certain number who accepted their Jesus into their hearts for the first time, who rededicated, who said yes to baptism, who said they would give their lives to ministry. So they used this and they employed this. We use this. I use this and I employed this because I knew I could get the result I wanted.
Right. That's
Right.
so, like, but the gospel's so much more, right? Like, and we've come to
There are
realize,
so many more atonement theories.
right.
Like bajillions.
Yeah.
There are so many other ways to describe and or to talk about God on the cross, Jesus on the cross.
Yeah.
That people do not need to be left to feel like a piece of garbage.
No. Or like Jesus died so I don't have to go to hell. Like, if that's what we're literally afraid of, like kids going to hell, like, one, I think we need to wrestle with our own internal makeup of like, what do we believe about Jesus?
Yeah.
But like, that's not going to help people love Jesus outside of camp.
No, it is a scare tactic.
Right.
It is. I mean, it's one of those that, again, like, I mean, I think this is, I've had some readers push back, and I think they're pushing back because camp is their sacred cow, and they do not want to believe that anything might taint said sacred cow. But the reality is that the message, theologically at least, that is communicated in this environment is one in which you've got, it's the old image on the donkey, and you've got the carrot in front of the donkey, the guy, it's probably a man, riding the donkey, is holding a carrot on a string on a stick, like down over the donkey's nose. That's the dangling carrot. And the dangling carrot in this scenario is heaven. And then you've got a whip in his other hand, and he's whipping the donkey's behind, and the whip behind him is hell. And so you have both reward and punishment. You have the juxtaposition, the black and white.
Yeah.
And so, of course, children, they do not want the bad thing. Of course, they are going to choose the good.
Yeah.
Of course, they are going to choose the better option, especially if everyone around them is choosing it, especially if that is most celebrated by the grown-ups whom they esteem.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
this is why we have to talk about camp right here, Andrew. This is it. Yeah,
no,
you get it.
And then all of a sudden, adults are left bewildered why their kids aren't following Jesus when they go away to college, when they've been given a meager scrap-filled plate of the gospel.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where the gospel was simply transactional, and it made no difference. And like you said, the camp world ignored the resurrection and the power of that new living, and so again, we get the results we want, and we have to deal with the consequences. Again, I don't think anybody sought to have, nobody did this with bad intentions. Like, I want to believe the good intented hearts of these Jesus followers, my brothers and sisters in Christ, right? Like, and so, but like, we do have to reckon with it. Like, the decisions they make impact who we are, who I am today, who you are today.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have to have these conversations, because you and I both want to raise our kids better or different. Maybe maybe better's the wrong, but that they can face a world that is different than the mid-90s.
Yeah. Well, and to be honest though, this is still happening today at camp. So this is not just camps like of my childhood.
No.
This is very much the rhetoric that is still being preached, that is happening in a number of different environments. But this, for me, as a parent of young boys, young men, seemingly turning into men, but
Right.
it is one of those that I have to believe that even if I don't send my kids to camp, that what they are receiving from my husband and I,
Hmm.
from church, when they even if they're tuning out half the service, when they go up to the altar, because they are allowed, because all are welcome at the altar,
Right.
when they go up and they put their hands out and they receive the bread and they receive the wine, that God is doing something in them.
Hmm.
And when the older people in our community and or everyone else, when they come up and they pass the peace and they say hello and they call them by name, I have to believe that God is doing something in those interactions.
Right.
And when they hear the gospel being read, even if they don't understand, and when they see their mama or someone else preaching, even if they, again, tune out for half of it, I have to believe that there is something spiritually formative that is happening in those moments that is creating and laying a groundwork for a life of faith.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
No, absolutely. But we are entering into camp season. We're recording this. Today's May 19th.
Also,
But and then this podcast will be released June 17th, right? So by the time these my listeners are listening to it, we'll be in the throes of summer. I know parents who are sending their kids to camp. I know youth leaders going to camp.
yeah,
That also want different, right? Like, I have
yeah.
friends who have kids who identify LGBTQ, and that are sending their kids still to evangelical camps and deal with this anxiety all the time of like,
Mhm.
will she be allowed to stay? Like, you
Yeah.
know? And so how do we help parents? How do we help youth leaders, people, like if they're experiencing this at camp, like how do we have conversations with them that might not help them escape this camp hurt, but also like maybe change the conversation or help enhance what they're experiencing?
Yeah.
Uh,
I think for me, there are a couple of different answers to that question. I firmly believe that parents and caregivers are the first touch point in a child's life, and
right.
so um, in that way, I believe that parents and caregivers can have conversations with their children before and after. Before, here's what we believe, and you might hear something else, but I want you to but tell me what you believe,
Hmm.
and let's talk about it beforehand. And then afterwards too, where that unpacking might happen. So I would say that is one of my recommendations, that we can and we should be having conversations about this, about the values of our family, about family belief systems, about
Mm.
who we believe God to be, whatever it may be, that we are grounding our kids really in who we are and in these values, more than what they might access or come in contact with at camp. I think the other thing too, though, is that I want to encourage people that there are, yes, there are camps that obviously are still very much within these spaces that to me are not welcoming spaces for a lot of
Mm.
our children. Um, and I also give permission not to go to those camps. But and with that, I also say that there are some incredible camps that are happening and that are taking
Mm.
place. And whether those camps are and camps that are under the umbrella of church camps, so to speak. So whether
Right.
that means finding a camp that's in another denomination that perhaps reflects your values or belief systems more, finding a camp that aligns with a child's gender, racial, or sexual identity. Those camps do exist, like the naming
Mm.
project that we talked about.
Right.
But as well, I'm starting to see a ton of churches, in particular, churches that are affiliated with the PEC, Post Evangelical Collective, that are starting to create their own camps.
Wow.
And they're going, we want to do something because we still believe in the value of what happens when kids get out into these spaces, when they are with
Hmm.
adults who love them, when they receive a positive message about who God is and about who they are. So there are also a lot of camps that I'm starting to see that are kind of like ground swelling, that are happening organically, that are just gorgeous.
No, that's awesome. Right. And I think it's just, church camp is following the tale of evangelical deconstruction and reckoning. And so, like,
Mm-hmm.
it only makes sense that things new would appear.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot harder project at times, is to create the new
Yeah.
when we're so ensconced in the
Mm-hmm.
old,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
you know, and where our kids find belonging, and like where
Mm-hmm.
kids love to go despite its $600 budget, if our $600 price tag on the cheap end,
Yeah.
like it's
Yeah.
absurd to me how expensive church camp has gotten.
Like, I mean, I've had a lot of people refute this, but the reality is that I looked up the top 5 church camps in America,
Yeah.
and they were all across the globe, and average price for a middle schooler to attend 1 week at camp was $1,694. Now, that being said, all of these places provided scholarships. This
Right.
did not include denominational support. This was the full price before any sort of knockoffs happened.
Yeah.
But I still sit here and I go, I can't afford that.
Right.
I'm sorry. I am not a New York Times bestselling author.
No.
The Theo Bros have not come at me yet, and so they have not raised my ratings yet.
Right. Exactly.
But
Yes.
but no, who can afford that? And
Right.
so camp then becomes an elitist, privileged experience for those who can afford it.
Right. Which then goes back
Yeah,
to excluding the people that probably need to hear God's message more so than
yeah,
the Theo Bro kids.
yeah, yeah. Come on, Theo Bros, come at
Come
me.
at
I'm
us. Yeah,
ready.
I know. I haven't gotten attacked either yet. So, like, I'm still flying under the radar,
We're
and so
waiting. Andrew and I are here. We're
here
here
we're
for the
waiting.
party.
Yeah. I always joke with people that, like, I'll know I've made it when I get my first really, scathing email or Facebook post,
Yeah.
Uh,
I did get my first 1-star rating, which I didn't read.
okay.
I can see the number of
Yeah.
ratings.
Yep.
I was sending an email out to my launch team, and maybe it was someone on my launch team. But so I don't actually know what they said. It could have been like, my book arrived late and I'm mad at Amazon.
Right.
But I was like, I've arrived.
You've
I got
arrived.
a 1-star rating. So
Yes.
yeah,
There you go.
yeah.
Yeah. No, but I think, just to encourage, listeners, if you have kids going or involved in kids' lives this summer, who are going to camp, like, what is the discussion to help them just
Mm,
navigate the complexities, like,
yeah.
for good and for bad, and just to help them hold the beauty of camp and to
Hmm.
recognize its place,
Yeah.
in their life.
Yeah.
And I think you're inviting us to hold the tension. And I think that's what's like, as we've all wrestled with faith, and like, what does faith look like for those of us raised in the evangelical world
Hmm.
who aren't quite happy there anymore, but like to recognize the
Hmm.
beauty that it gave us, but then also to critique it in ways that hopefully we can build something new.
Yeah.
And that's your invitation to us with church camp, as
Yeah.
as sacred as it is, it's something we need to look at and say, okay, is there a better way?
Hmm. Yeah.
And so if you could go back and do it over again, like, what have you thought, like, what would that look like? What would your 7-day spiel look like?
Yeah. I need to work on an answer to this question. Someone at my launch party also asked this, and I just said, that is great. Can we do lunch and I'll think about it?
Yeah.
Um, but quite honestly, I think years ago, I mean, literally decades ago, I remember a friend who loved middle school kids. She had been a middle school counselor, and she then became a therapist for middle school kids. And
Hmm.
she said, if I could ask middle school kids 3 questions for the rest of my life, it would be this. The 3 questions, excuse me, that every middle school kid wants to know is this. And this is what I would center my conversation on.
Yeah.
She said those questions are, who am I?
Mm-hmm.
Who are my friends? And where am I going?
Hmm.
So I think if I were talking to a group of middle school kids, I'd ask questions with that, because I think you have those 3 questions. Who am I? I mean, you're talking about identity right
Yeah.
there. Identity, you can go into a million different facets of spiritual identity, of racial, ethnic, and cultural identity, of sexual and gender identity. I mean, of every type of identity that exists. Who am I? Where am I going? What does it mean to center ourselves in the present and to not be scared of the future or to dwell on the past? Who are my friends? What does it mean to be enveloped by community?
Yeah.
And to do this in a way that also is perhaps with the God who is already present in this place.
Right.
So I think I might start there. I think I would just over and over and over again talk about how much God loves you, because that is truth. I believe in a God who does no harm.
Right.
So in that way, I don't need to err on the side of human depravity and making kids feel like they killed Jesus, and can instead just be like, dude, God loves you. I guess I got to talk for another 20 minutes about that, but that's the bottom line. God loves you, and you are God's beloved.
Right.
Start and end stop.
Yeah. And he surrounded you with friends who love you and who want to love you, and find those friends who love you because of you.
Yeah.
No other relationship works starting with fear. I didn't choose Claire, my wife, because of fear, or I fell in love with her of who she is and who's she becoming. So why do we treat that relationship, which is the basis of all other relationships, differently? If I started my marriage relationship with fear, people would be like, Andrew, don't marry her, get out, leave, stop.
Better hope people would say that.
Yeah. There's so much, and yes, there, but it's also, there's good.
There is good.
No, but to work with psychologists or people who know human development, and to develop a camp model based on appropriate adolescent development, that might make sense.
You think? Yeah.
maybe, I don't know, instead of a 7-stage, quick redemption story.
Oh, Lord. Yeah.
But
I'm here for it. If you have an idea, let me know. I actually did almost put that as an appendix in the book. I will probably be writing that on Substack sometime soon.
Okay.
But I did initially, I had asked a couple of friends to come up with potential talk sequences. I ended up only getting one by the deadline that I needed, so I didn't put it in.
For sure.
But I would like to feature that at some point, because I think it's a question that I do keep getting asked.
Yeah. I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yep. Awesome.
Cool.
And it's a question I ask all of my guests as we begin to wrap up. What's the story you want the church to tell?
I mean, can I just go back to what I've probably said 30 times already? That God is here, and God is in this place, and this God, who is the God of love, loves you exactly who you are, as you are. And so this God, who is not a God of harm, is just wildly, passionately for you. And that's what matters.
Yeah. Awesome. And then some fun questions to wrap up. About food.
Okay.
What's one food you refuse to eat?
Hot dogs.
Is it because of camp?
Maybe slightly. I just feel like I was over hot dogged as a child. I just can't do it. My own kids love them, but I can't.
Okay, fair enough. On the other end of the spectrum, what's one of the best things you've ever eaten?
This is not one of the best, but it is the best that I ate for lunch today, which was an In-N-Out cheeseburger, no onions.
Okay.
It was perfect.
Yep.
And it is exactly what's coming to my mind right now. So
perfect. No, being raised in Southern California myself, In-N-Out always holds that special place.
It was delight, utter delight. Yeah.
Yes. And when people tell me that Five Guys is better, they obviously have never fell in love with Jesus. They just don't know Jesus.
I will say this. I did wonder if you were going to ask me about camp food.
Yeah.
Most memorable camp food, if I can throw it in.
Yes, please.
Which actually I think it was kind of in alignment with hot dogs, which is maybe why I have horrible memories and don't like it today. But at this one camp that I worked for 4 summers, the camp staple, the most memorable food was called Little Smokies. And they were literally little mini smoked sausages / smoked hot dogs. They were absolutely disgusting, but they were the camp favorite.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that there were several summers that I lived on Little Smokies and s'mores. Woman cannot live on bread alone,
No.
Little Smokies and s'mores alone, but she did.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I'm just saying.
I know. I'm sure. Yes. We didn't get into camp food, but yes, camp food. Yes. The joys
And the sorrows.
and the sorrows. Yes.
Yes. Equal territory there.
Yes. And then finally, there's a conversation among chefs about last meals, as in if you knew you had only one more meal left to enjoy, what would it be? And so if Cara had one last meal to enjoy, what might be on her table?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, like I said, I'm a gardener. So
Yeah.
I get really excited about the food I grow in my little urban backyard.
Nice.
So I think I would start with a meal from the backyard. Although, if you actually know gardens, you'll know that none of these things grow in the same season. So
Right.
it's going to take some like Holy Spirit magic or something. But I would get a big artichoke and I'd
Mm,
have artichoke with melted butter and garlic, again, from my backyard because it tastes better. I would then get a bunch of stalks of dinosaur kale.
mm,
It's the Lacinido kale, which is a
mhm,
special kind of kale, but it's my favorite type. And I would massage that kale, and then I have this lovely, like creamy orange, mandarin orange salad recipe that is
mm.
I could just eat the entire thing. And then I would just get a big old fat heirloom tomato
Oh,
and
yes.
I would chop it up. And you do not need very much with an heirloom tomato. You can just chop it up. And I mean, I wouldn't even do like little pieces, I would do some big chunks and just put a little bit of sea salt over it. And then
Hmm.
I think I would probably, I mean, I know I said I just had an In-N-Out cheeseburger for lunch, and I do occasionally eat meat. But I guess my last meal would be vegetarian because then I would just have a big hunk of bread,
Yeah.
like big piece of sourdough. My neighbor Teresa, she is like the sourdough queen. She drops off like a lesson or a loaf, excuse me, every week.
Oh,
So I would let her know that I was about to die and I needed some sourdough.
yeah.
So I'd ask her for a loaf, and that would be the final
Mm,
piece of my meal.
wow. Man, I'm in for your meal. I love vegetables. Especially fresh ground. Like until you've tasted them, you never know. Like
Yeah,
until you've tasted a really good carrot, like you're like, oh, carrots, they're delicious.
but just you wait. Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
even add a carrot. I mean, I've
No.
got several growing right
Nice.
now. Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, Cara, this has been a joy and a delight. It's been fun.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for your ministry. And if people want to learn more about your work, where can they find you?
Yeah, on most of the socials, I am Cara Meredith Writes. You can look at Andrew's show notes to see how that is spelled. And then I'm on Substack also, carameredith.substack.com.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah. And do buy the book, Church Camp. It's a great book. It's a fun read. I think it helps us, again, reckon with who we are. And yeah. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with others. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Biggest Table, where we explore what it means to be transformed by God's love around the table and through food. Until next time, bye.